You have to get really, really, really super clear on exactly what addiction is if you want to outsmart it. If you're thinking that it's something that it's not, you're going to be chasing all the wrong solutions. So let's get really clear. Let's talk about why addiction happens to some people and not to other people. There are really 3 pieces to this formula, 3 key ingredients. Number 1, the person has to have an inherent vulnerability, something inside that makes them more vulnerable to addiction. In my experience, that something is probably anxiety, ADD, or depression. Those are all things that shift around your normal brain chemicals and throws them out of alignment that make you susceptible to developing an addiction problem. So you've got that inside vulnerability. Other mental health problems would also be included in that, like a mood disorder or a psychotic disorder. Those are really severe ones. But for the most part, in our office, we see anxiety, ADD, the top 2, and then depression, I guess, would be the 3rd most common thing that we see. So inherent vulnerability is the first part of the equation to developing an addiction. The second part is usually just because someone is any one of those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that they'll become addicted. Usually addiction happens when you're going through something really difficult in life. And by something really difficult, I mean it's usually like some major unwanted loss of some sort, like loss of a loved one, loss of a job, loss of a friend, even loss of a dream. Like if you always thought you were going to be a star football player and you were doing great all the way through college, and then you had an injury, and now all of a sudden your whole future is changed. That's called loss of a dream, and people really grieve that. So any kind of major loss, a divorce, even loss of a pet could count if you're super close to your pet. So you've got that major loss. The reason why that's important is because that does a downshift in your brain chemicals even more. Less serotonin, less oxytocin, less dopamine, all those good chemicals downshift, which makes a gap or a missing piece, if you will. You've got underlying inherent vulnerability. That's usually something like ADD, anxiety, depression, mixed with a really bad time in someone's life. Let me just add a little piece to that. Teenagers and young adults are really susceptible to developing addiction, more susceptible than most people, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of those reasons is it's just a super tough time in life in general. Think about it, all the boyfriends in and out, all the friends in and out, so you've got a lot of that loss and gain going on there. So that's one of the reasons why teenagers are prone to addiction. But let's get into that last 3rd element, and that's that you have to actually be using drugs or alcohol. If you're already vulnerable and you've gone through a really tough time and you're using drugs and alcohol, that is the recipe for disaster. That's usually when addiction takes hold of people. Most of the time when people come into my office and I say, when did your drinking or when did your using sort of switch from having a good time or social into a problem? And they'll usually identify some major life event as the turning point, because usually before that event they may have been drinking or using, but it was kind of in that normal range, and all of a sudden they've shifted out of that normal range into problematic using. So hopefully that answers the question of how did I become addicted, or how did my loved one become addicted?